The sound of my brother's laughter still echoes in my mind, sharp and cruel like glass breaking in a quiet room. I'm getting the house and the business. She just gets the dolls. His words weren't just a boast, they were a weapon. And in that moment, sitting in the heavy mahogany-paneled office with my family gathered around, I felt the sting of every insult, every dismissal I had endured for years. My name is Anna Wells, and I'm 32 years old. For the past decade, I have been the backbone of my family's construction company, Timbermere Brewing in Portland, Oregon. While my older brother Sebastian partied his way through college and then spent his 20s drifting through exotic beaches and expensive cities on our father's dime, I was pulling 80-hour weeks managing contracts, negotiating with suppliers, and keeping the company afloat. Yet somehow none of that mattered to the people seated around me that day. To them, I was still Daddy's little princess, the girl who collected dolls. Sebastian's smug grin as he adjusted his tie, basking in the approval of relatives who laughed along with his cruel joke, burned itself into my memory. My Aunt Patricia even chimed in with mock sympathy, saying at least Sebastian understood business. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. Business. My brother had never stepped foot on a construction site. He couldn't tell a 2x4 from a steel beam, yet they treated him like the golden heir, while I was reduced to a footnote in my own story. I folded my hands in my lap and stayed quiet because I had learned long ago that in this family defending myself was like screaming into a storm. My words always dissolved into nothing, but inside something was stirring, something sharp, dangerous, and alive. And then everything changed. Mr. Harrison, the lawyer who had served our family for decades, cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the laughter like a blade. Actually, he said, his tone deliberate and calm, the company was never in your father's name. The room fell silent. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the rustle of papers, even my own heartbeat pounding in my chest. Sebastian's smirk faltered, confusion flashing across his face. My aunt's fake tears froze. For the first time in years, I felt the balance of power shift ever so slightly toward me. In that moment, memories of my father's final days washed over me. I had been at his bedside when he passed, his rough hand gripping mine, his voice weak but steady as he whispered, "You've been my right hand all these years. You understand this business better than anyone." I had brushed off his words back then, thinking they were just comfort for a grieving daughter. But now I understood. When Mr. Harrison revealed that my father had quietly transferred ownership of the company to me 5 years earlier, I sat straighter in my chair. 5 years, that was when Sebastian had been finding himself in Thailand while I was managing the largest development contract in our company's history. 5 years of decisions, crises, and triumphs that had all passed through my hands while my brother played at being important. Sebastian sputtered, his voice cracking as he insisted it was impossible. "I'm his son. I'm supposed to inherit the business." But Mr. Harrison's steady words silenced him. The business had been mine since 2019. I was the legal owner, the one who had grown its value by 40% under my leadership. My hands shook beneath the table, but I kept my face calm, my expression unreadable. Inside, though, a fire raged. Years of being dismissed as just the bookkeeper were finally giving way to truth. As Sebastian's voice grew desperate, accusing me of tricking our father, I felt an unfamiliar sensation bloom inside me. Not fear, not anger, power. For once, I didn't have to prove myself. The proof was in the documents, in the numbers, in the undeniable reality that I had carried this company while he had been nothing more than a name. But the true vindication came when Mr. Harrison read the details of my inheritance. Sebastian would get the family home complete with a crippling mortgage and a few depleted investments. I would get the antique doll collection, something my grandmother had cherished and passed down. Sebastian laughed bitterly at that, mocking me yet again. And then Mr. Harrison revealed the truth: those dolls were worth over $500,000. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. My relatives stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. The dolls Sebastian had mocked for years, the ones he had reduced me to in every cruel joke, had turned out to be more valuable than anything he inherited. And in that moment I realized my father had orchestrated all of it, every detail, every safeguard, every choice. He had trusted me, believed in me, and left behind a legacy that could no longer be stolen. I wanted to scream, to laugh, to cry all at once. Instead, I looked at my brother with a small, controlled smile. For the first time, he wasn't the golden boy. He wasn't untouchable. He was a man who had been outplayed, outsmarted, and outdone. And I, the sister he had dismissed and mocked, was the one holding everything together. The lawyer's words blurred after that, my mind caught between past and present. I remembered my teenage years standing on construction sites with dirt under my nails, while Sebastian attended parties in pressed suits. I remembered nights spent in the office fixing mistakes he didn't even know existed. I remembered the way my father looked at me in those final days, his eyes filled with something more than love, faith. Faith that I would carry what he had built, even when no one else believed in me. As Sebastian argued with Mr. Harrison, demanding explanations, I finally let my voice break through the silence. I reminded my brother of his 5-year degree, stretched into 7, because he kept taking time off to find himself. I reminded him that while he was posting vacation photos, I was managing contracts worth millions. My words weren't loud, but they cut deeper than any shout could. For the first time, my family listened. For the first time, they couldn't deny me. And as I stood in that office, I felt the weight of years of dismissal slide off my shoulders. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the girl with the dolls. I was the woman who had built something lasting, who had fought through every obstacle, who had earned every ounce of respect they had withheld from me. I looked at Sebastian's pale face, his shaking hands, and I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. For all his arrogance, all his mocking laughter, he was nothing without the illusions he had built. And now those illusions had shattered. But pity wasn't forgiveness, and it certainly wasn't forgetting. That was the beginning of my story, the moment the tables turned. The moment I realized that revenge isn't always about screaming or fighting. Sometimes it's about standing in silence while the truth does the work for you. And yet, as satisfying as that moment was, it was only the beginning. Because betrayal has layers, and family secrets run deeper than anyone dares to admit. I thought I had uncovered everything in that lawyer's office, but what awaited me was a labyrinth of hidden debts, unspoken truths, and choices that would test not only my strength, but my very soul. In the days after the will was read, the air in my family seemed to grow heavier, as if every word, every glance carried hidden meaning. Sebastian avoided me, but when our paths crossed, his eyes were full of fury. He didn't see me as his sister anymore. He saw me as the enemy who had stolen what he believed was rightfully his. It wasn't just about the business or the dolls. It was about pride. Sebastian had built his entire identity on being the heir, the golden child, the one everyone expected to lead. Now that illusion had been shattered, and I knew men like my brother. He wouldn't surrender quietly. He would dig, claw, and manipulate until he found a way to take back what he thought was his. I could feel the tension whenever we entered the same room. He would mutter under his breath comments sharp as knives. "Enjoy it while it lasts. Dad never really meant for you to keep it." At first I ignored him, but silence has a way of feeding bitterness, and soon his resentment began to bleed into every corner of my life. I found myself thinking back to childhood moments, trying to trace when the cracks had started. I remembered being 8 years old, watching from the window as my father taught Sebastian how to swing a hammer. I had begged to join, but my Aunt Patricia told me to stay inside with my dolls. "Construction is for boys," she said dismissively. I spent that afternoon in my room, staring at my dollhouse, trying to convince myself it was enough. But my father had noticed. Later that evening, he slipped into my room, handed me a small toolbox, and whispered, "If you want to learn, I'll teach you." That was the first secret we shared, my father and I. In the quiet of the garage, long after Sebastian had lost interest and run off to play video games, my father showed me how to measure wood, how to drive a nail straight, how to draw up plans. Those moments built the foundation not just of my skills, but of the bond between us. He saw what no one else wanted to see: that I was capable, determined, and willing to work harder than anyone. Now, years later, those lessons were the reason I was sitting in the CEO's chair, while my brother sulked in the ruins of his entitlement. Still, the victory didn't feel clean. At night, lying in bed, I wondered if I had truly earned it, or if it was simply handed to me by my father's love. The weight of the company pressed on my shoulders. Employees depended on me. Contracts, deadlines, reputations, it was all mine to manage now. And Sebastian, lurking in the shadows, was waiting for me to fail. The first test came quickly. A week after the will was read, I received an email from one of our biggest clients expressing concern about leadership instability after my father's death. My stomach dropped as I read their words. If they pulled out, it would devastate us. I called an emergency meeting presenting detailed reports and plans, reminding them that I had already been handling operations for years. My voice shook at first, but by the end of the call, I felt their confidence returning. They agreed to stay. When I left the office that night, I saw Sebastian leaning against his car, arms crossed, a smirk on his face. "You think you're a leader now? Just wait. You'll crack." His words followed me home, echoing in my mind. I hated that he knew exactly where to strike the place where my confidence was still fragile. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the dark, staring at the dolls my grandmother had left me. Their glass eyes seemed to hold secret, silent witnesses to the chaos unraveling around me. It was then that I remembered something my grandmother once told me. I was 13, sitting in her parlor, dusting the dolls as she watched from her rocking chair. She leaned in and whispered, "These dolls are more than toys. They're guardians of our legacy, hidden in plain sight." At the time, I thought she was being dramatic, but now staring at them, I wondered if there was more to her words. The next day, I began carefully examining the collection. Each doll was intricately made porcelain faces, painted with delicate care. But as I studied them, I noticed tiny engravings along the bases, initials, dates, symbols I didn't understand. I searched online and discovered they were marks from a renowned European craftsman whose works were not only rare, but historically significant. My grandmother had been quietly collecting priceless art while everyone mocked me for cherishing toys. I felt a surge of vindication. The very thing Sebastian had laughed at the dolls was not only valuable, but proof of the foresight and wisdom passed down to me. My grandmother had trusted me just as my father had. They had seen through the family's biases and chosen me as the keeper of their legacy. But Sebastian wasn't done. He started showing up at the office uninvited, trying to stir dissent among employees, whispering that I wasn't experienced enough, that the company was at risk under my leadership. Some of the older men who had worked with my father for decades hesitated. I could see doubt in their eyes. One evening, I found myself alone in the office, staring at my father's old desk. His worn leather chair still smelled faintly of his cologne. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine what he would say to me now. I heard his voice in my memory. "You don't have to prove yourself to those who underestimate you. Just let your work speak louder than their doubts." So I doubled down. I poured every ounce of energy into proving not just to them, but to myself that I belonged here. I negotiated a major contract with a new developer, one that would secure us for years to come. I implemented efficiency systems that boosted profits. Slowly, the tide turned. My employees began to see me not as the daughter who inherited, but as the leader who delivered. But the more I succeeded, the more Sebastian unraveled. His bitterness turned toxic. At a family dinner, he exploded in front of everyone, accusing me of manipulating our father, of turning him against his own son. My mother sat frozen, unable to defend me, while my aunts whispered in shock. I tried to stay calm, but his words cut deep. He wasn't just angry about the business. He was angry that I had broken the illusion that he was special. After that night, I realized something crucial. Sebastian wasn't just my rival. He was my enemy. And enemies don't stop until they're defeated. Still, a part of me grieved. This was my brother, the boy I once shared secrets with under the covers, the boy I protected from bullies at school, the boy who once promised me we'd always stick together. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man consumed by entitlement and envy. And yet beneath the anger, I felt something else rising, a determination to protect what my father had entrusted to me no matter the cost. Because this wasn't just about inheritance, it was about legacy, respect, and survival. I didn't know then how far Sebastian would go to reclaim what he thought was his. I didn't know how many more secrets my family had buried waiting to surface. All I knew was that this was only the beginning of a war that would test every ounce of strength I had left. The weeks turned into months, and my brother's resentment festered like a wound that refused to heal. The angrier he became, the more reckless his actions grew. I could feel his desperation in every glare, every whispered insult at family gatherings, every attempt to undermine me at the company. At first, I thought I could ignore him, that his bitterness would eventually burn itself out. But I underestimated the length Sebastian was willing to go. It started with whispers among employees. A few of the senior staff men who had always favored my brother began questioning decisions I had made, decisions that had already proved profitable. They hinted at instability in my leadership, suggested I was taking unnecessary risks. When I confronted one of them privately, he admitted Sebastian had been feeding them lies, claiming I was funneling money into personal accounts, that I was reckless, that I was planning to sell the business. I was furious, but more than that, I was hurt. These were men who had known me for years, who had seen the long nights I spent keeping the company afloat. And still they listened to Sebastian because he was the son who fit their idea of an heir. Male, confident, arrogant enough to convince them he belonged. I realized then that this fight wasn't just about Sebastian. It was about the deep-rooted bias that had always made me invisible, that had always placed my worth second to his. And if I didn't fight harder, I could lose everything my father had entrusted to me. One evening, exhausted after another long day of putting out fires, I returned home to find my front door slightly ajar. My stomach dropped. I pushed it open cautiously and found the house in disarray, drawers, pulled out papers, scattered furniture, overturned. My heart pounded as I checked each room, terrified I would find someone still inside. But the house was empty. The police later confirmed there had been a break-in, but nothing of real value was taken, at least not in the traditional sense. My jewelry, electronics, cash, all untouched. But the filing cabinet where I kept old company records had been rifled through. Contracts, invoices, letters from my father, all disturbed. I didn't need a detective to tell me who was behind it. The next day, Sebastian showed up at the office with a smug smile, carrying a file of evidence he claimed proved I had mismanaged funds. He tried to present it to the board, waving the papers around like a prize. But he didn't realize I had already spoken to the police. I calmly pointed out that the documents in his hand had been stolen from my home, and that a report had been filed. His face went pale as the board members shifted uncomfortably, realizing what he had done. It should have ended there, but Sebastian wasn't finished. A week later, I received a phone call from Mr. Harrison, our family's lawyer. His voice was grave as he told me he had uncovered something troubling while reviewing my father's old files. There were hidden debts, loans taken out years ago tied to a piece of land our company owned. At first, I was shocked. My father had never mentioned debts that significant. But as Mr. Harrison explained further, the truth hit me like a hammer. The loans had been secured not by my father but by Sebastian. Years ago, during one of his many business ventures, he had convinced our father to co-sign. My father had done it quietly, perhaps hoping to protect Sebastian's pride. But the payments had never been made, and now the debt had ballooned into something massive. I sat in silence as the lawyer spoke, my hands trembling. My father had carried this burden in secret, never telling me, never letting me see the cracks in his armor. He had protected Sebastian until the very end, even as he placed the company in my hands. Anger boiled inside me, not just at Sebastian, but at the betrayal buried in my family's silence. My father had trusted me to lead, but he had also shielded my brother's failures, leaving me to deal with the aftermath. I confronted Sebastian, demanding answers. He didn't deny it. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, smirking the way he always did when he thought he had the upper hand. So now you know. Dad always believed in me no matter how much you pretended to be his favorite. He signed for me because he knew I was destined for more than you could ever be. I wanted to scream. Destined. He had drained resources, betrayed our father's trust, and now threatened to drag the company down with him. But in his twisted mind, he was still the chosen one. I left that meeting shaking with rage, but also with determination. If my father had carried this secret, I would carry the truth into the light. I wouldn't let Sebastian's mistakes destroy everything I had fought for. The following weeks became a blur of lawyers, bankers, and strategy sessions. I found a way to restructure the company's assets, to renegotiate the debts to keep us afloat. It was exhausting, but each victory fueled me. Each solved crisis reminded me that I was capable, that I was strong, that I was the leader my father had seen in me. But Sebastian, humiliated and cornered, grew darker. At a family gathering, he lashed out in front of everyone, his voice venomous as he shouted, "She stole it all. Dad never meant for her to have it. He wanted me to lead." The room fell silent. My mother looked at me with tears in her eyes, torn between her children. My aunts whispered, unsure where to stand. And in that silence, I realized something: this fight had gone beyond money, beyond business. It was about truth. It was about who we were, who we had always been. I stood, my voice steady, even as my heart raced. I told them everything: the debts, the lies, the break-in, the years of work I had poured into the company, while Sebastian wasted his opportunities. I spoke not with anger, but with conviction. And as I spoke, I saw something shift in their faces. For the first time, they saw me not as the girl with the dolls, but as the woman who had fought through betrayal and chaos to keep our family's legacy alive. Sebastian stormed out that night, his pride shattered, but his hatred burning brighter. I knew this wasn't the end. I knew he would come back with more schemes, more venom, more attempts to destroy me. But I also knew something else: I was ready, because the truth once revealed cannot be buried again. And the more Sebastian tried to drag me down, the stronger I became. What I didn't realize then was that the deepest betrayal was still waiting, hidden in the shadows of my family's past, a secret so shocking it would change everything I thought I knew about my father, my brother, and myself. After that night, something inside me shifted. I had stood in front of my family, exposed Sebastian's lies, and for once they had believed me. But the victory was hollow, because beneath it all, I sensed a deeper truth was still hidden. My father had left me the company, yes. He had trusted me, yes. But he had also hidden debts, covered for Sebastian, and concealed things from me that I couldn't yet see. And I was right. It began with a box. Mr. Harrison, our family lawyer, called me into his office one afternoon, saying he had found documents my father had left specifically for me. He pulled a weathered wooden box from a drawer, its edges worn smooth from years of handling. My heart pounded as I lifted the lid. Inside were letters, my father's handwriting, neat and deliberate. The first one I opened began with my name. "Anna, if you're reading this, it means the weight I carried is now yours. I am sorry. I wanted to protect you from the truth, but I also wanted you to have the chance I never did, to lead without chains." My hands trembled as I read his confession. Years ago, before Sebastian and I were even born, my father had made a mistake. He had partnered with a man named Victor Hale, a ruthless businessman who used intimidation and shady deals to build his empire. Victor had lent my father money to expand the company, but the loans came with conditions, the kind you never escape. For decades, my father had been quietly paying Victor off, keeping him at bay, trying to shield the family from his influence. And then when Sebastian turned 20, he fell into Victor's orbit. My father had begged him to stay away, but Sebastian, hungry for validation and power, saw Victor as a mentor. That was when the debts became dangerous. My father had signed agreements to cover Sebastian's reckless investments, hoping to keep Victor from pulling my brother deeper into his web. But by doing so, he had tied the company tighter to Victor's grip. The letters made it clear my father's decision to transfer the business to me wasn't just because he trusted me. It was because he believed I was the only one strong enough to break free of Victor once and for all. I sat in silence, the pages trembling in my hands. All those years, while I thought my father was grooming me quietly for leadership, he had also been hiding a war. A war I hadn't even known I was stepping into. That night, I confronted Sebastian. His face went pale when I mentioned Victor's name. He didn't deny it. In fact, he laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Of course Victor was part of Dad's life. You think he built everything without help? You think you're the savior here? You're just cleaning up his mess." My blood boiled. "You fed his influence, Sebastian. You dragged us deeper. Do you even realize what you've done?" He sneered. "I did what Dad wouldn't. I took risks. I wasn't afraid to reach higher. But you just play it safe, act like a saint while you inherit everything." His words cut deep, not because they were true, but because they revealed just how warped his pride had become. He didn't see Victor as a danger. He saw him as an opportunity. And then Sebastian said something that chilled me to my core. Victor still believes in me. He says the company should be mine, you won't hold it for long. For days after I barely slept, I felt the weight of my father's secret pressing down on me, the shadow of Victor Hale looming over every decision I made. If Sebastian was right, if Victor still had influence, then everything I had built was in jeopardy. The climax came sooner than I expected. One evening as I left the office, I found a black car parked outside. A man in a tailored suit stepped out, his smile cold and sharp. "Miss Wells," he said smoothly, "Victor would like to meet with you." Against my better judgment, I agreed. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was a need for answers. Maybe it was the fire in me that refused to cower. The meeting was held in a dimly lit restaurant, the kind where whispers carried more weight than shouts. Victor Hale was older now, his hair silver, but his presence filled the room. His eyes, icy and calculating, studied me as if I were merchandise. "I knew your father well," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "He was a proud man, but he understood the price of ambition. He carried that price until his death, and now it seems you do too." I clenched my fists beneath the table. "My father may have owed you, but I don't. The company is mine, and I won't let you use it to feed your greed." Victor chuckled, the sound chilling. "You're bold. I see why he trusted you. But boldness without loyalty is dangerous. Your brother, he understands loyalty. He understands me. He could still be the heir your father wanted." The rage that surged through me nearly broke my composure. Loyalty. Sebastian's loyalty was to himself, to his ego, to the man who had been poisoning our family for decades. I leaned forward, my voice steady. "My father gave me the company because he knew Sebastian would destroy it. He trusted me to end this cycle. And I will." Victor's smile faded, his expression hardening. "We'll see," he said quietly. That night, as I drove home, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly they ached. I realized then that this was bigger than me and Sebastian. This was about breaking free of a legacy of corruption, about proving that my father's trust wasn't misplaced. But it was also about survival. Because if Victor saw me as a threat, I knew he wouldn't stop at intimidation. The days that followed were some of the most tense of my life. Contracts suddenly fell through. Suppliers pulled out at the last minute. Anonymous calls warned me to step aside before it gets ugly. It was clear Victor was testing me, trying to shake me to prove I couldn't handle the pressure. And Sebastian, he was nowhere to be found. Until one night, he showed up at my apartment, his face pale, his hands shaking. For the first time in years, he didn't look smug. He looked terrified. "They're turning on me," he whispered, his voice broken. "Victor, he doesn't trust me anymore. He says I'm useless. He's using me as leverage against you." I stared at him, torn between fury and pity. This was the brother who had mocked me, betrayed me, tried to destroy me. And now he was just another pawn discarded by the man he had worshipped. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face, but another part, the part that still remembered the boy I once protected, the brother I once loved, hesitated. I let him inside. That night, as we sat in silence, the truth hit me with brutal clarity. My brother was not just my rival. He was also my father's greatest failure, Victor's pawn, and my burden to carry. If I wanted to break this cycle, I couldn't just fight Sebastian. I had to fight for him too. But as I looked at him, trembling and broken on my couch, I realized something else: forgiveness might not be possible. And that perhaps was the cruelest truth of all. Sebastian sat on my couch that night, like a shadow of the brother I once knew. His hands trembled, his eyes darted nervously, as though he expected Victor's men to burst through the door at any moment. For the first time in years, the arrogance that had fueled his every word was gone, replaced by fear. "I thought he believed in me," he whispered, staring into his empty glass. "Victor said I was the true heir. He promised me power connections, everything Dad never gave me. But now he says I'm nothing, that I've outlived my use." I studied him in silence, my heart torn in two directions. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to reach for the brother I had once loved fiercely, the boy I had shared secrets and scraped knees with. But another part, the part scarred by years of betrayal, lies, and cruelty, wanted to turn away. He had chosen this path. He had invited the wolf into our family. Still, the truth pressed against my chest: if I abandoned him now, Victor would destroy him. And as much as Sebastian had hurt me, I couldn't let my father's son, the same boy my father once cradled with pride, be devoured. Then you have a choice, I said quietly. You can let Victor break you, or you can finally stand with me. Not as rivals, but as family. He looked at me, his eyes filling with tears. Why would you help me, after everything I've done? Because I am not you, I thought. But I only said because someone has to end this cycle. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Sebastian and I, uneasy allies, now began digging into Victor's dealings, searching for leverage. What we found was worse than I expected. Hidden accounts, shell companies laundered funds tied to our family's name. My father had tried for years to shield us from the rot, but it had seeped in through every crack. The deeper we dug, the clearer it became. Victor had no intention of letting us go. He had bound us with debts, with favors, with threats whispered in the dark. And yet I knew that if I didn't fight now, I would never truly own the legacy my father had entrusted to me. One evening, Sebastian and I sat in the office surrounded by files, exhaustion heavy in the air. He rubbed his temples and muttered, "Maybe he's right. Maybe we can't win. Maybe you should just sell the company, walk away before he destroys you too." I stared at him, anger rising like fire. "That's what you've always done, Sebastian. Run when it gets hard. Hide behind lies, let someone else carry the weight." "I won't do that. Dad trusted me. I won't betray him by giving up." He looked at me, then really looked at me, and for the first time in years, I saw shame flicker across his face. Maybe he finally understood what I had carried all along. The climax came when Victor himself made his final move. He called me, his voice smooth and mocking. "Anna, I admire your persistence, but persistence doesn't win wars. Power does. Sign the transfer papers, give the company to Sebastian, and I'll forgive the debts. Refuse, and I'll bury you both." It was a trap. He no longer cared about Sebastian, he wanted control, and he thought my love for my brother would be my weakness. But he underestimated me. The next day, I walked into that meeting with Victor, not with fear, but with evidence. Sebastian, for once, stood by my side. We laid out the files we had uncovered, proof of his laundering, his threats, his illegal dealings. Mr. Harrison was there too, along with federal investigators I had quietly contacted weeks earlier. For a moment, Victor's face remained unreadable, his eyes cold as stone. But when the agents moved forward presenting warrants, I saw the flicker of defeat. "You think this ends me?" he sneered. "No," I said calmly. "It ends us. My father's debt, my brother's mistakes, your grip on our family. It all ends here." Victor was led away in handcuffs, his empire crumbling around him. The man who had haunted my father's life, poisoned my brother's pride, and threatened my future was finally gone. But victory is never clean. The company survived, but scarred. Rebuilding trust with clients, employees, and partners took months of relentless work. And Sebastian, though he had helped in the end, remained a fractured soul. He apologized, but his words were heavy with guilt he couldn't escape. We spoke, but the easy bond of childhood was gone. Some wounds cut too deep to ever fully heal. And yet, as I stood in the office one evening, the sun setting behind the city skyline, I felt something shift. For the first time in years, I could breathe without the weight of secrets pressing against my chest. My father's trust, my grandmother's foresight, my own resilience, they had carried me through storms I never thought I'd survive. I realized then that revenge hadn't been the point. It wasn't about watching Sebastian fall or Victor collapse. It was about rising, about proving to myself, to my family, to the world, that I was strong enough to carry a legacy born of pain and turn it into something greater. Do I forgive Sebastian? I don't know. Some days I want to. Other days the memories of his laughter, his mocking words, his betrayal are too sharp. But forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. And maybe that's the lesson. Some betrayals never leave us, but they can shape us into something unbreakable. If you are listening to my story, maybe you too have felt the sting of family betrayal, the weight of being underestimated, the pain of carrying burdens no one else believed you could bear. I know how heavy it is. I know how lonely it feels. But hear me when I say this, you are stronger than they realize. You are capable of carrying more than they ever believed. And their betrayal does not define you, your resilience does. My brother once laughed that I would inherit only dolls, while he claimed the house and the business. But in the end, those dolls were worth more than he could imagine. The business thrived under my hands, and I discovered something priceless: the strength to write my own story. If my story touched you, if it reminded you of your own battles, your own scars, I hope you will share your thoughts with me in the comments below. Tell me how you survived, how you rose, how you turned betrayal into strength. And if you believe these stories matter, if you believe in giving voice to pain that others try to silence, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Because betrayal may break us, but it can also remake us. And sometimes the sharpest wounds carve the strongest souls.